how they would act, and most importantly, the elaborate costumes. There was a lot of elaborate costumes. And another part of the 1920s was vaudeville was very popular, and I thought that the Cats out of nowhere kind of had a little bit of vaudeville in them. So some notable moments. Throughout all the shows when they were running, they would have a lot of different guest stars. Not only would the girls be walking around and dancing, but they would also have musicians and comedians in their shows. So in 1918, the Foley seasons featured Eddie Cantor, W.C. Fields, and Will Rogers. And these three were very big names at the time. Another interesting moment was the Midnight Frolics, which this is a picture from that show. It is a more intimate version of the Foleys, and it was held on the roof of the New Amsterdam. It was a much more risque show, as if the show before wasn't risque enough. But there isn't a lot on that show. I think it was supposed to be pretty hush-hush. But besides that, a lot of famous people would be in the audience for these shows. Two very famous people being the Duke of Windsor and Jack Dempsey. The most highly paid performer of the era was Jessica Reed, and she was a Ziegfeld girl who made $125 per week, which would have nearly been $1,500 by today's standards. So not only was the highest paid performer of the era a Ziegfeld girl, but this also helps to show how popular these shows were. So the relevance to theater today. The Follies set the stage for modern sexual objectification. So think 1940s pinup girls and centerfolds. They were pretty girls who knew they were pretty, but they weren't used in a derogatory way. Many Ziegfeld girls felt empowered by the expression of their sexuality, hence the photos, the performing, the fame. Certainly a novel idea in the 1920s, but in many ways a sentiment that still echoed in today's world. Like I said earlier, almost all the Ziegfeld girls are dead today. But while they were still alive and while they were much, much older, there's many accounts of them saying how they still view themselves with that celebrity mentality and the idea that they always want to look their best. They didn't see it as men objectifying them. They just saw it as, we are beautiful and we're going to show the world. So to me, when I was thinking about sexual objectification, Chicago came to mind. In Chicago, Roxy Hart says, "Don't you want to take my picture?" And not only does Chicago have many sexual scenes, the costumes they wear, it's very skimpy and they just enjoy it. So that was there are many shows that do have these themes, but for me, Chicago was the one that kind of stuck out the most. It did hit pretty big in Hollywood. It had 3 films after it. The first film in 1937 was The Great Ziegfeld, and it was all about Mr. Ziegfeld, his 2 wives, kind of that whole thing. And then in 1941, Ziegfeld Girl came out, and it starred Judy Garland. And then in 1946, which was the clip that we watched earlier, the Ziegfeld Follies came out. And then it hit Broadway in 1964 with Funny Girl, and Funny Girl actually tells Fanny Brice's success with the Follies. So this is a clip from The Great Ziegfeld, and I think it is more true to what it actually looked like than the earlier clip. As you can see in that video, it was just a lot of girls with very elaborate costumes slowly walking on the stage. It almost reminded me of the Victoria's Secret show that they have every year, but that's kind of what the main part of the show was. So the social and political climate of the time, it went into the Roaring 20s. So some important dates were in 1911, March 25th, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. In 1912, the Titanic sinks. In 1918 was the Great Influenza Pandemic, and it is said that in one day in New York, 851 people died. In 1924 was the first Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. In 1927, the Ziegfeld Theater opens. In 1929, the Wall Street crash, and then the 1930s was the Great Depression. So it was the age of Roaring 20s, Prohibition, and lots of theater growing. However, the Wall Street crash and the Great Depression did end what the Ziegfeld Follies was. Mr. Ziegfeld did move to Hollywood, he got sick and died, but right before that he went very bankrupt after his theater opened because it wasn't a huge success. And that is what the Ziegfeld Follies was, and here's my sources. Thank you!